that the Civil War provoked. Hayes, you may begin.
In an interview regarding his book, Lincoln's Constitution, author Daniel Farber stated that the Civil War was the greatest crisis in the history of the Constitution, so it raised the most fundamental questions about the nature of the constitutional system. The Civil War created a constitutional crisis unprecedented in American history by resolving many of the issues remaining from the Constitutional Convention, as well as by provoking a number of new issues that remain unresolved today.
One of the questions that the Civil War resolved was that of secession. In 2006, Justice Antonin Scalia wrote that if there is anything resolved by the Civil War, it is that there is no right to secede. Attempts to secede from the Union have often been with the assertion of the Declaration of Independence, that it is the right of the people to alter or abolish the government if it becomes tyrannical. Recently, states used this justification in petitions to secede following the re-election of Barack Obama, but the 1869 case of Texas v. White determined that since the United States is an indestructible union composed of indestructible states, the question of secession is resolved.
Slavery was another issue settled by the war. The Philadelphia Convention founded a nation that was based upon a series of compromises, such as the 3/5 and fugitive slave clauses, that allowed for the continuation of the practice in an effort to preserve an already tenuous union. The constitutional anomaly of the Civil War resolved this peculiar institution by breaking the Union and forcing the country to acknowledge the imperfections of the Constitution by passing the 13th Amendment.
While slavery was resolved by the Civil War, the issue of citizenship and the rights it entailed remained unsettled. In response to Dred Scott, Congress passed the 14th Amendment, establishing just solely citizenship. The writers of the 14th Amendment also attempted to begin the process of incorporation with the Privileges and Immunities Clause. However, this failed in the slaughterhouse cases, and incorporation would not be initiated until the Due Process Clause brought the Bill of Rights to the states in the 1925 case of Gitlow v. New York.
Questions of equality prompted by Reconstruction and the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause remained unresolved well into the 20th century, when the Warren Court began defining equality. The jurisprudence of equal protection continues to be inconsistent due to the use of a rigid tier system that recognizes racial cases with the highest level of scrutiny, while using lower scrutiny levels for cases involving sex, disability, or wealth. The court's inconsistent nature regarding the issue of equal protection may come to further fruition this year, as the justices consider the legitimacy of the Federal Defense of Marriage Act and Proposition 8 in California.
President Lincoln's actions throughout the war provoked a number of constitutional issues regarding the extent of the executive branch that remained unresolved well after the conclusion of the war. Following the first shocks of the Civil War, Congress did not convene for 4 months. In this time, Lincoln used his power as commander-in-chief to suspend habeas corpus, order a naval blockade, and institute a draft, powers that were granted to Congress but not to the executive in Article 1. This expansion of executive power prompted Justice Roger Taney to thoroughly castigate Lincoln's actions in ex parte merriment. However, the court would later change course on the issue of executive power in the prize cases, when it allowed for Lincoln's use of a naval blockade without a declaration of war.
Senator Charles Sumner defended President Lincoln's actions throughout the Civil War by describing his purpose to do what he can to carry forward the principles of the Declaration of Independence, a position that justified many of Lincoln's less constitutional actions. However, many of the issues provoked by Lincoln's administration remain unresolved. Following the events of the 9/11 attacks, President George W. Bush essentially started the war in Afghanistan with Executive Order 13239. Bush also suspended the writ of habeas corpus for suspected enemy combatants. However, this was found to be unconstitutional in Hamadi v. Rumsfeld. Thank you.
Your whole thing about the rigid tier system in racial cases versus sex disability, well, the 14th Amendment was not meant to address sexual equality. I mean, it really wasn't. If you look at what Thaddeus Stevens and what they were going for, was they simply wanted to establish a basis for racial equality after slavery. So how can you justify your strong stance that there should be just this equal thing? Am I walking into a lion's den right now?
Did you see our counsel? Just wait.
Well, the wording of the 14th Amendment is remarkably vague. If the intent was to create only racial equality, it certainly did not do so. It doesn't say that equal protection under the laws shall not be violated based upon race. It just says that every person shall have equal protection of the laws. So naturally, this has progressed to every person should have equal protection, be that a woman, a gay person, a Hispanic person, no matter their race, their sex, anything else, they still, due to the wording of the 14th Amendment, have a legitimate claim to equal protection.
Well, but can't we discriminate economically, even with the equal protection clause? We can make the government can make economic discrimination, can't it? Why isn't that any different than sex or gender?
It really, can you repeat the question? Hold on, lost it.
It's okay. What makes sex or gender on a level with race? What specifically about it? I understand that, you know, we're after these third wave feminism, and you know, and we've got all sorts of ideas that we can't make distinctions between, you know, men and women, but what is it that links sex and race?
In many ways, discrimination based upon sex is far more prominent than discrimination based upon race. In fact, Shirley Chisholm, who was actually the first African-American woman in Congress, stated that she had been discriminated against more times as a woman than she had as an African-American. So essentially, particularly now where race isn't nearly as big of a variable as it was previously, the ideas of equal pay for equal work prove that sex has become a far greater variable for discrimination than race has.
Well, additionally, too, the idea of all men and women are created equal. We're all people and we're all humans. And even with slavery, with the idea of property, it's morally wrong.
What made the 15th Amendment necessary?
There was still, what the 14th Amendment did was it said that all white males over the age of 21 were able to vote. However, this did not extend to the large amount of African-American males who were suddenly citizens but then didn't have that right. So what the 15th Amendment was for is it essentially amended a clause in the 14th Amendment that had created this entire class of citizens that were technically citizens and should, by the current laws of the nation, be able to vote, but weren't.
You guys, tend to rely on this 1869 case of Texas v. White. Wasn't Texas v. White just a tyrannical decision by the tyrannical northern-dominated court? And so if this northern government has become so oppressive that the South was compelled to leave it to begin with, why on God's green earth should we recognize as authoritative? Like, it's just the Stamp Act, for crying out loud, isn't it?
Well, additionally to the case of Texas v. White, some state constitutions have it in the Constitution that the state is not allowed to secede, such as Nevada. Even after the re-election of President Obama, Nevada tried to secede from the Union, but clearly we were not able to with the limitation of the
Things
clause.
are unjustified just because the text says so?
Yeah, the group of people form the government, and that group of people that form the government, known as the state, no longer want to serve the federal government. Why can't they just leave?
Because the entire point of the United States is to be an indestructible union made of indestructible states, and that's a direct quote from the majority opinion in Texas v. White. The United States was created to be a union, and the states joined that union knowing full well that it was meant to be together.
Really?
Yes. And as a result, the idea of leaving the union based on something as, small as the guy you didn't like got elected is really ridiculous and goes against the founding principles of the United States.
Well, what about Thomas Jefferson's claim that each generation should rewrite the Constitution every 25 years?
That would offer far too many problems. Essentially what it would do is create this ability for every generation to rewrite something on a whim. And based on, the pendulum swinging back and forth, this could very easily go back and forth from being super progressive, like we saw in the early 1900s, to going way back to being far more conservative in nature, as it did later in the 20th century.
But in agreeing with Thomas Jefferson, Clarence Thomas once said that law should not be made on precedent but on vitality of life. So with the modern times, and society always changes, such as the gay rights movement right now, with changing times comes changing measures and changing laws.
Good stop there.
I hate these 6-minute cross sections.
So, first of all, anytime anyone throws that 20